been over a week since the season finale for The Last of Us show, and since it's all finished now, with the season 2 coming up in the future to adapt the second game, it's important to know if the show held up to the video game. Avid players of the game went into it hoping that it would be the same, while other viewers who didn't play the game just came into a new experience. So the point of this entire thing is to review the show and what it did in comparison to the games, going over briefly all the episodes. From the start of the show, one of the changes they started with, and only carried for like 2 episodes, was going into the backstory of the virus. They spoke on how it can be, what it can do, and then when it started, what course of action they can take to try and cure the world of it. So adding a scientific background to it was actually a pretty good addition. Episode 1 had much more backstory into it, giving Sarah, Joel, and Tommy a normal life, so that way when the inevitable scene of Sarah getting shot happens, you'd feel more for her. I think the scene itself is what made people emotional, not necessarily like the added backstory, but the fact that the acting was so good and the concept was so harsh, a parent having to hold their dying child. Tess's character I thought was well done, but it felt a little different than the game's Tess. I also don't know why they decided to add the last scene in episode 2 with how the infected gets spread. Like, the infected comes up to Tess and kisses her, then transfers it, since spores aren't a thing in this universe, and I was just like, very uncomfortable seeing that. It's supposed to like represent it's not an evil infection and welcomes anyone in who's close to turning, to show like a calm to it, but you know, if it was so benevolent, then maybe don't have brainless humans trying to kill anything they see. The next change was for episode 3 with Bill and Frank. For starters, the games had you work with Bill, and the interaction he had with Ellie and Joel was great. In the show, he's not in it, only a backstory. Now, there's nothing wrong with a backstory at all, especially one like this that showed a really nicer side to the world they're living in, but it has 2 problems. One, it was really long, longer than most episodes, and they could have used more screen time for Ellie and Joel to explore and bond. And 2, it doesn't progress the story. Say you take the scene out, Ellie and Joel are still going to find the note with the important message of love is important and protecting those you care about is worth it, even if it might hurt. That's the issues I had, at least. Aside from the story and the great acting for both of those actors, it was really nice, and my favorite line is when the two are arguing and Bill says like the government is all Nazis. Episodes 4 and 5 showed where like adding stuff unnecessarily is becoming more apparent. We get into the backstory of Kathleen and Perry in our first cameo of the original voice actor for Tommy, Jeffrey Pierce. Now, their story was fine and all, but again, it didn't progress the plot much and they kinda died as quick as they came. I felt for them like a little bit, but not enough to the point that I was upset they got killed off. And the scenes we did get with Joel and Ellie bonding and protecting each other was nice and really refreshing, which is exactly why I wanted more of that. See, the games can have more dialogue due to random encounters between characters, something the show is limited on, whereas the show can choose what they show. And in this case, it would have been nice to see more of that. For Sam and Henry, Sam is now deaf, and I guess it's neat to show how a deaf person would survive in the world they're living in. I thought that was definitely interesting. And if anything though, it just kind of shows he really can't do anything and has to rely too much on Henry. They're supposed to mirror Ellie and Joel in terms of a relationship, so that was very good to see. Eventually getting to Jackson in episode 6 was cool to see. The encounter between Joel and Tommy reuniting was really heartwarming, and the city and scenery, much like a lot of the show's scenery, was incredible. We got a potential cameo of Dina for season 2, and I would have liked more exploration of Jackson and its people though. The main difference between the show version of Joel and the game version of Joel was really shown in this episode. In the games, Joel is cold and isolated and harsh to everyone, whereas in the show, he was able to open up in a really great way to Tommy. Bottling it all in was getting to him, and finally him letting go was very emotional to see. The confrontation scene between Ellie and Joel was great, and they nailed it for the most part compared to the games, but again, it showed how Joel in this show is less aggressive and angry than the game version. Another slight change was how Joel got injured. He kinda just gets stabbed instead of impaled by a large iron fence piece after falling from like a 2-story building. So yeah, this is more realistic to survive, so nothing crazy here. After that, Ellie's flashback comes into play for episode 7 as she's trying to care for Joel and his injuries. I think this episode did well to showcase The Last of Us DLC, which went over the relationship between Ellie and Riley, along with the meaning of loss and basically how caring for someone is worth it. Again though, as great as it was and insightful, it was too long, and in the previous episodes, it kind of feels like they're just rushing to conclude the story, and the time used in this backstory could have been put to making it flow better in terms of storyline. After the flashback into the next episode, we get a look into Ellie and how she's caring for Joel and her meeting the Cannibal Club, which has our second cameo of the original voice actor for Joel, Troy Baker, playing the character James. I think adding some insight into the group was a good touch, and them trying to make David this like religious leader was alright. It shows us that a group can do anything to try and survive, even if it means eating their own or anyone they can, which obviously from the outside perspective no one condones, but from their perspective it's a necessary evil to survive. He's still a creep, so that's consistent. The scene where Ellie hacks David up was really aggressive, more so than the games, but it felt kind of odd to see her leave the place and then get comforted by Joel in the middle of the forest, as opposed to him going over to her in the house and trying to stop her. I'm indifferent to it, and maybe there is a bit of realism there where she could have potentially hacked at Joel when he was trying to go up to her. Our second to last cameo comes into play in the next episode as we see Ellie's mom, played by the original voice actor for Ellie, Ashley Johnson. Seeing a lone mother have to give birth alone and dealing with infected is insane, so seeing this was really well written and emotional. We see Anna asking Marlene to protect Ellie and seeing her trademark knife being given to her. Going to Joel and Ellie, we see the uneasy feelings Ellie has and how Joel has now completely opened up to Ellie and even begins to talk about Sarah. The famous giraffe scene was cute to see, so I am glad that they added that in. Another thing they added was Joel telling Ellie about how much he wanted to end himself after losing Sarah. Again, this is showing how this Joel is much more open with his emotions and less cold than his game counterpart. The following hospital scene did not hold back Joel's true nature, something that these last two episodes and the first episode shined on. Before that scene though, one thing to point out is that Marlene thinks the doctors can make a cure. With the limited technology and research into the cordyceps, what makes them think that they can just do it? The game itself also has research notes that essentially say it's kind of impossible. And one of the things that makes this kind of, I guess, bittersweet and dramatic is that she's willing to sacrifice her best friend's daughter for a potential cure that we might not even know will work. Joel then goes on his violent and emotional killing spree in a slower fashion compared to the games, which was an interesting addition. In the lab scene, we get our last and final cameo of Laura Bailey as a nurse who voiced Abby in The Last of Us Part 2. Now, this last episode makes you think one of two things, and everyone who's played the games has also thought of these one of two things for over 10 years now. 1. Did Joel make the right move? And 2. What would you have done in that situation? On the one hand, it's a father trying to save his adoptive daughter, so the parents viewing this might not know what to feel, and on the other hand, Joel might have doomed humanity from a cure. Keyword is might, since again, there was no definitive research on exactly how taking a piece of cordyceps and replicating it could have been done. The final scene of Ellie telling Joel to swear about what he said about the Fireflies was true was also just as good as the games. And with that, the season ends and part 2 will be a works in the future. Couple of things while we wrap it up. Despite the show changing some things, adding some things that were really good and making some changes that were very questionable, I think it is safe to say that the show did the games a very good service in being a faithful adaptation. I think the video game voice actor cameos were really nice additions, and to be honest, they themselves could have played the characters in the show since they kind of look similar for the most part, although Ellie's in-game age might be an issue. Season 2, with the way Season 1 went, is going to be very polarizing, I'm sure, but we're going to get to that when it actually happens. Overall, I enjoyed the show very much, and I hope everyone did too, since this does help bring more attention to the video game industry itself. If you've made it this far into the video, I really appreciate it, and consider subscribing for more. Let me know what you all think down below about the show. If you have any questions, comments, what was your favorite edition, what was something that you maybe thought was a little unique. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.